Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Tea Party is Dead podcast. I am your host, Jim, and today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Mike Maharrey. He is the Communications Director from the 10th Amendment Center. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing outstanding.
Great. All right, well, we just got done from a rather, I don't know what you want to call it, insane election season. That's actually probably the most appropriate word for it. And excluding the presidential race, I think that this was a huge victory for the 10th Amendment. We have had issues all over the country, and some did not make the issues, but some did. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And the most exciting thing to us were the ballot initiatives in 6 states that were fundamentally nullification type initiatives that passed. 3 of them healthcare freedom issues, 2 states decriminalizing marijuana, and then Massachusetts decriminalizing or creating a medical marijuana system. So these are great wins for liberty. They're great wins for federalism because they defy the federal government and their overreaching powers. And I think that maybe that gives us a little bit of hope in terms of where people's minds are moving, because they just don't want the federal government creating these one-size-fits-all solutions, and they recognize that as people of individual states, they should be able to make their own decisions on these things.
Yeah, I think I saw 60 Minutes a few weeks ago do a story on medical marijuana, and there was this one city that's pretty much said if the federal government decides to step in, that it doesn't matter what 12 people they will get on a jury. They will institute jury nullification, and that is pretty much overrule that law. I was just wondering, since all these states' rights seem to be bubbling and there's so much energy going on, I would almost think that jury nullification would also grow throughout the next decade or so. What were your thoughts?
I think you're right, and I think that's a powerful tool that goes hand in hand with state legislative nullification, because it provides an actual physical tool. If it does end up in a federal court somewhere, they can't see the jury that's willing to enforce these unconstitutional acts. That puts teeth in the state legislation. So, you couple something like jury nullification along with constitutional sheriffs interposing and refusing to cooperate with these federal drug raids and stuff, and they depend greatly on the assistance and the support of the state governments, and ultimately, as you just pointed out, of the people. So if we pull that rug out from under them, I think we can effectively begin to roll them back into their prescribed role. And, that's ultimately the aim, because centralized government is the enemy of liberty, and we don't want that.
That's awesome. All right, so over the last 12 months, we have seen a lot of people. I don't necessarily mean to single out the Tea Party, but after all, this podcast is called The Tea Party is Dead. There were Tea Party candidates that advocated for state rights, but at the same time, they supported candidates that didn't necessarily support states' rights. Don't you think that they're essentially cutting off their nose to spite their face?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And one of the prime examples that comes to my mind, simply because I just wrote an article about him recently, is Alan West down in Florida, which I guess he's involved in a recount or something at this point. But he was one of the Tea Party darlings, and I guess he had the right talking points in terms of some of the fiscal things and whatnot. But he supported the NDAA, supports the Patriot Act. He was advocating for a national standard for teenage driver's license. It's clearly a federal overreach. So to say on one hand, I'm for limited federal government, and then to give unwavering support without ever calling him out on these other issues is ridiculous, and you lose credibility. And I really think that, you're talking about the Tea Party being dead, I think that that's part of its problem, is that it wandered away from its initial roots, which were, as I understood it, fiscal responsibility, limited government, cutting spending, and they became a tool for the Republican Party. And the Republican Party has its good points, but it has its elements that are just as big government and overreaching as what the Democrats do. So, yeah, I agree completely. I think if you're going to have a Tea Party that's supposed to be independent, then they need to stick to principles, which is what we try to do at the 10th Amendment Center. I mean, no matter who you are, if you advocate something that violates the Constitution, we're going to call you out on it. And on the other hand, we're going to praise you when you stand up for constitutional principles. And I think that's what people want. I think people are tired of this political pandering. They want some principles stuck to, and they want to see their freedoms and liberties protected.
Right. Now, before our conversation, or before this podcast started, during our conversation, you mentioned that you have been overwhelmed since the last election, which should be a good thing. I was hoping maybe you could talk about maybe an issue or two that seems to be more popular than the others, like what states are picking up the phone and calling you guys for assistance on?
Well, I think there's two overriding issues that we're going to see in this next legislative session, and another issue that has the potential to become an overriding issue. First off, obviously we've touched on it already, is the Federal Health Care Act. We saw 3 states pass constitutional amendments or acts that give healthcare freedom to the citizens of those states. We're hearing a lot of talk about how can we as a state block implementation of these health exchanges, and if enough states do that, I'm of the opinion that it has the potential of, if not gumming up the works totally, at least creating a lot of hindrances into getting this monstrosity established. So, I think probably that right now is overriding, especially with a lot of the Republicans, a lot of the Obama, there was a Freudian slip, a lot of the Romney supporters that were kind of looking to him to come in and save the day on this healthcare thing. Now they're looking for alternatives. So that's probably the number one issue. The number two is the indefinite detention provisions written into the National Defense Authorization Act. And this is one that actually very much crosses party lines. I mean, we've partnered with organizations that are hard left and gotten support for a lot of organizations on the right. I think pretty much universally people are a little bit nervous about the idea of the federal government having kidnapping powers, and that's in essence what the NDAA is, or the detention provisions. There's no process or no mechanism for due process in this, and it's a horrible violation of the Fourth Amendment. Last year, Virginia passed a law, and it was signed by the governor, that made non-cooperation with any attempts to do NDAA detention in Virginia the law of the land. Texas, this legislative session, there's already a bill been introduced in the pre-filed for the Texas legislature. There's one working in Michigan, and we're hearing up to 10 states will consider some type of legislation to block implementation of this federal kidnapping bill. So that's a big one, and that has the potential to pick up a lot of steam as the debate for the 2013 NDAA gets going, and different groups get mobilized with the legislative session. So those are the two biggies, and then I think another one that has a potential to begin to grab some traction is efforts to rein in the TSAA, or TSAA, thinking basketball, NCAA, TSA. A Texas legislator, Representative David Simpson, has pre-filed a bill down in Texas that would criminalize basically sexual touching, the things that we would call molestation, as a condition for air travel. And to me, this is just a common sense measure that most Americans intuitively understand, that just because somebody has a badge and a uniform doesn't give them the right to grope your little girl. And this legislation in Texas would actually provide criminal penalties if an agent goes over the bounds and grabs somebody's genitals or touches them in an inappropriate way. And I would expect that this is another issue that could catch on. A lot of this is copycat stuff. You get one legislature and it starts getting some momentum, and other legislators get the guts to follow through. So I'd say those are the three biggies, and we may see more.
That's great. I was wondering what 10th Amendment issues might be on the horizon that aren't on everybody's radar yet. For example, I know Agenda 21, some people know about it, some people don't. I think one state so far has nullified Agenda 21. I know Montana, over this past election, has recognized that corporations are not people, which I think is fantastic. Are there any other examples? The general public aren't just...
Well, I think some of the Agenda 21 stuff has potential to percolate, and some of the environmental stuff. There have been movements in states, particularly coal states like Kentucky, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, some talking of trying to crack down and nullify some of these overreaching EPA type of things like the Clean Water Act, and for the states to reclaim control over those elements, which is where they belong in the first place. So, that's something that could gain some momentum. I think another thing, depending on what happens in the next couple of years with the new administration or the new reincarnation of the old administration, there's always been kind of a percolating movement with the Firearms Freedom Acts that basically would block any federal control over ammunition and guns that are made completely within the borders of a state. That's something that could potentially take off if, Obama was to start pushing the UN arms control treaties and that type of thing. A lot of this stuff will percolate to the surface depending on what happens in the political spotlight. Healthcare is in the spotlight now, so that's the biggie. Depending on what winds down the road in the next year or two, you could see any number of issues that could potentially pop up. So, yeah, I think the environmental stuff, firearms freedom, up in the Northeast, like in Maine, in some of those states, there's been some movement on food sovereignty, which kind of gets into the intrastate, getting the DEA and the FDA out of the business of regulating things that are grown and sold within a state's borders. Again, federal government has no authority over that. So there's a lot of different issues. I mean, pick an unconstitutional act, and there's a bajillion of them out there. There's potential for nullification. So. Gotcha.
All right. Now, you are in Kentucky, so you know that there's a strong push for industrial hemp in the bluegrass state.
Mm-hmm.
Since Washington State and Colorado just passed a ballot initiative for recreational marijuana, I would almost think that industrial hemp is a no-brainer. I mean, that, I believe, is the cart before the horse. What were your thoughts on industrial hemp farming in Kentucky and the other states in the union in regards to pushing this forward?
Well, I tell you what, that is an issue that is ripe for the pushing, and people ought to take a little time and study up on why the industrial hemp laws exist, and look at DuPont and 3M, and I'll just give you that as a hint. So much of that legislation was designed to protect specific industries, but to more specifically answer the question, here in Kentucky, there is a very, very strong public sentiment that would support hemp farming. Kentucky was actually the number one hemp producer at one time, and the tobacco industry, which was the backbone of this state's agricultural economy for many, many years, of course, has been decimated by all of the not only the movement away from smoking, but also from the draconian regulation of the product. So this state would absolutely flourish with industrial hemp farming. It would be something that could really revive an economy that is in much need of revival here in a rather poor state. That said, the legislative structure here in Kentucky is pretty spineless. Now, there is a hemp bill that has been pre-filed. There will be some movement to get that passed here in the next legislative session, but generally speaking, from what I've seen with the Kentucky legislature, they'll do these things and then they'll put a stipulation in there, well, we're not going to violate any federal laws or acts, which really kind of makes what they're doing completely useless. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to do this if the federal government will give us permission. Well, the federal government's not going to give you permission, and, it's a case of asking permission where none is required. So I think it's going to take a little bit more political fortitude to get this done than what we have here in Kentucky. I give one caveat. Like I said, there is a strong grassroots support for it, and a lot of times that type of grassroots support can bubble up and impact the legislature. So, I think if it was sold right, if we could get people off of the mentality that it's marijuana, it might have some potential. And Kentucky is also going to consider medical marijuana this next session. So if that starts getting traction, then the hemp may well follow, which I know is odd in people's mind, but the medical marijuana is a little bit more well known, and I think people are used to that idea in their heads, and they're kind of like, if somebody wants to use it and it helps them with dealing with sickness, with chemo, why should we not do that? So I think there's been a little bit of the resistance broken down on that issue, whereas people aren't quite as educated on the hemp at this point.
Right. Industrial hemp in Kentucky will be interesting over the next 2 years because Mitch McConnell is up for re-election, and he has, in my opinion, tried to go above and beyond to get the Tea Party support. Whether or not they'll give it to him is another story, but when it comes to industrial hemp and Mitch McConnell's re-election bid, it might be time for Mitch to come to terms with his fears and desires in 2014.
Yeah, that's going to be a very interesting Senate race. Not to get too off topic, but there's a lot of displeasure with Mitch in this state. But then there's also the whole element of, he's a ranking senator and he's important, and so it'll be interesting to see if any opposition rises up in the Republican Party here in the state, and then who ends up running against him on the Democratic side. He definitely has been trying to jones for that Tea Party support. He's brought Benton on as his campaign manager, which I can't wrap my head around, but Jesse Benton, if people aren't familiar, is very prominent in the Ron Paul campaign, and Mitch McConnell and Ron Paul are seeds in, not even different pods, but different trees as far as I'm concerned. So, it'll be interesting, and maybe that will, create a dynamic, and certainly Rand Paul is favorable towards hemp farming. So it'll be interesting. I'll definitely be something I'll be following closely.
You and I both. Okay, so after the election, I did a lot of downloading. I'm still doing downloading, and I'm watching interviews and reading blogs and things of that sort. And, there's a lot of smart people that are talking about that the gay marriage folks and not the medical marijuana, but the recreational marijuana people, that states' right is coming back, and all these issues are starting to win in the nation. And then, towards the end, they talk about how eventually the federal law needs to step in and have some sort of uniform compliance so all the states will be on the same page. I don't know if I agree with that, because the states are, laboratories of legislation, which is a great thing. I was just wondering if moving from the 10th Amendment to federal guidelines, is something that you think is dangerous, even if, let's say, 49 states eventually legalize marijuana and gay marriage, and there's still that one state that is not.
Yeah, I think that's terribly dangerous, and it goes against the very grain and principle upon which the United States was founded. The whole idea, the whole American experiment was that we're going to have, these 13 sovereign states, and we're going to come together and we're going to delegate certain powers to a general government for certain specific purposes, namely, defense, dealing with foreign nations, and a few other things. And we're going to leave the bulk of decision-making at these state levels. That's the intention of the framers. That's how the Constitution was sold to the ratifying conventions. That's what the people wanted. They didn't want one-size-fits-all government from on high in Washington, D.C. And it's just like you said. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, it really doesn't make any sense. You know, you live in Ohio, I'm in Kentucky, you've got people in California, very different cultures, very different situations, very different economies. Who in their right mind thinks that one policy on any issue is going to be best for all 50 of the states? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I was talking to somebody about this today, and most Americans instinctivally distrust monopoly. And you go out on the street and you pick somebody out and you say, hey, what do you think about economic monopoly? You know, Walmart. And you'll get them off on a tangent about how dangerous it is, and they're gonna screw their customers, and they're gonna overcharge, and all of the horrible things that we know a single business in control of an entire industry would likely do. And then they'll turn around and advocate for monopoly government.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, to me, monopoly government is more dangerous than an economic monopoly because, you know, Walmart, they can only sell us Chinese junk. A government has guns. They can force us and compel us to do pretty much anything they want us to do. So, you know, dividing sovereignty, like you said, it creates different laboratories. We can experiment with ideas. We can find out what works within a given region, what works within a given state. And then on top of that, it divides power and keeps centralized power from overwhelming us and getting into the hands of somebody dangerous. I mean, if you look at the history of the centralized state, it is the most murderous, dangerous thing that's ever existed in human history. If you look at the worst genocides, the worst human rights violations, they all come from these centralized states. The former Soviet Union, Pol Pot in Cambodia, you know, Idi Amin, the Turkish Empire and their oppression of the Armenians. You go back and you look at these centralized powers are dangerous, particularly to minorities. So we want to decentralize, we want to divide power, and we want the individuals in each state to decide, hey, this is what's best for us. And if we want to have gay marriage in California, by golly, have gay marriage in California. And if the folks in Alabama don't want it, more power to them. And that gives people options. People in Alabama that want to be married that are of the same sex can head over to California and do their thing. And, you know, if somebody in California is offended by that, they can move to Alabama and everybody will be happy.
Right, right. Okay, so speaking about gay marriage, my question is, how dangerous do you think it is for groups to file lawsuits in order for a court to decide on a particular issue? For example, the gay marriage advocates, they immediately started filing lawsuits after, I think it was Prop 8 in California, and this is something that's now going to go to the Supreme Court to be decided, for better or for worse. And the reason why I say that is because if you are a gay marriage proponent, you should be celebrating what happened last week. So, you know, we now have some states that allow it, some states that don't. Now, the Supreme Court, whenever they come into the picture, they are going to come down and make one sweeping call that will affect the entire nation, which I think can be dangerous because, you know, the tragedy about it is if you're a gay marriage advocate, it's almost, if the Supreme Court strikes down gay marriage, it's almost the gay marriage advocates' fault because they're the ones that brought the lawsuit to the Supreme Court. I was just wondering, and this is just one example, don't you see groups that are going to the courts, they don't understand the unintended consequences?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think that's true on a lot of different things. You know, even just not taking it away from an individual issue and moving to a more philosophical kind of look at the situation. When you go to the government, whether it be through the court system or whether it be through the legislative process, to advance your particular position and basically force that position on the rest of society, what you're doing is you may win that battle and get your way in that particular, movement that you're trying to advocate for. But what you've unintentionally done is you've given the government, whether it be the courts or the legislative process, you have given them the authority and position to turn around and implement something that may not be to your advantage when somebody else is in power. So what you're doing is you're empowering the federal government to compel people to do things. And I think this in and of itself, just on a philosophical level, is a very dangerous thing, because that power can be used for good or that power can be used for evil. And eventually it's going to be used for evil. And, I talk about this a lot with the whole idea of, with state sovereignty issues. And you get a lot of schizophrenia out there on this, and you'll get people on the right that will be all gung-ho about, decentralizing and giving the states authority over health care. Shouldn't be a federal government thing. And they'll all gung-ho for that, and they'll support you. But then they'll turn around and say, well, we need to have federal drug laws, and we need to have the federal war on drugs. This is a great thing, and the state shouldn't be allowed to decide. Well, okay, I understand that you don't like marijuana from a moral position, but when you give the federal government the power to regulate what a person puts in their body, then you also tacitly give them permission to regulate your health care. You can't have it both ways. So you've either got to have freedom and liberty and decentralization, or you have to say, okay, federal government, you tell us what you want us to do and we will comply. And it's not smart. We need to stick to a principle as opposed to trying to get our position and our particular little fiefdom established and have the government do it for us.
Gotcha. All right. He is Mike Maharrey. He is the Communications Director at the 10th Amendment Center. I'm assuming that there is a website called the 10thamendmentcenter.com. Would that be correct?
You are absolutely correct. It is 10thamendmentcenter.com. It's all spelled out, so TENTH, amendmentcenter.com, all one word. And encourage everybody to go check it out. We're constantly updating articles, blogs. We've got legislative tracking. We need volunteers, so if you're interested in getting involved in your state to push state sovereignty type issues, you can sign up and volunteer there. And then I have to make my shameless plug. I'm finished writing a book, and it is going to be released on next Monday, which is it's called Our Last Hope, and it's the philosophical, moral, and historical case for nullification. And I'm real excited about it. I think it's a timely book, and you can go to our 10th Amendment Center store and pre-order that right now. And I will say thank you to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Mike. We hope to have you on in the future.
All right. I really appreciate it.